All right, so yesterday, October 18th, there was this crazy wildfire up in the Oakland Hills. And, it really hits home for us here in the Bay Area. We've been combing through reports from CBS, San Francisco, and SF Gate, and yeah, it sounds pretty intense. So I figured, why not do a deep dive, unpack what happened, see how everything was handled, and maybe, just maybe, we can all learn a thing or two about staying safe in these kind of scary, fire-prone areas.
When I first heard about this fire, what really struck me was where it started and how quickly it escalated.
Yeah.
I mean, the Oakland Hills, that area has a history with wildfires, right?
What?
And this one had all the ingredients for a real disaster.
Yeah, and speaking of where it started, CBS was saying it kicked off near Interstate 580, Mountain Boulevard, and Keller Avenue, around 1:30 in the afternoon. So, definitely not your average campfire mishap.
No, not at all. That location, it immediately sets off alarm bells. I mean, think about it. That's almost the exact same spot as that horrible firestorm back in '91. Steep slopes, tons of dry brush. It's like the textbook definition of fire hazard.
It's like the whole area is holding its breath, hoping it doesn't happen again. And according to CBS, the fire went to 3 alarms in, get this, 20 minutes. By 2:15, it was already at 4 alarms. That's insane.
Yeah, and it didn't stop there. It quickly escalated to a 5-alarm fire, which, let me tell you, that's the highest level of alarm you can have. It's basically an all-hands-on-deck situation.
Okay, wow. So for those of us who aren't firefighters, what does a 5-alarm fire actually mean?
It means that every single fire crew in Oakland is either fighting that fire directly or on standby. It's basically saying this is as serious as it gets.
And it wasn't just a threat to some open space. CBS reported at least 2 homes were completely destroyed. Dozens more were right on the edge of being engulfed in flames.
And you can't forget about the evacuations. Over 500 people in the Cabalo Hills neighborhood had to evacuate. It shows just how seriously officials were taking this fire.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a lot of people to relocate on such short notice. But it sounds like it was the right call, especially considering they had over 80 firefighters on scene. Plus, CAL FIRE was called in for air support and extra ground units.
They needed all the help they could get. CBS and SF Gate both mentioned the crazy conditions those firefighters were facing. High winds, super dry brush, and the terrain, those hills are no joke.
Speaking of being prepared, I remember SF Gate mentioned that Berkeley was urging its residents to evacuate. And that was even before the fire got anywhere near them.
That's smart. It is way better to be safe than sorry.
For sure. They were basically saying if you live on a hillside and might have trouble evacuating quickly, just get out of there now while you still can.
Exactly. Because once a fire starts spreading like that, especially in those kinds of conditions, it can be almost impossible to stop it.
It's like a perfect storm of bad circumstances. You've got this fire in a spot that's practically built for wildfires. On top of that, you've got weather conditions that are just begging for a disaster.
And then throw in the incredibly tough job those firefighters have just to get to the fire, let alone put it out. It's a recipe for disaster.
It's terrifying to think about. Even with all those firefighters and resources, they were up against some serious odds. So how did they finally start getting a handle on this fire?
Well, the good news is, by evening, firefighters had managed to stop the fire from spreading any further. CBS reported that, which is a huge relief.
Oh, definitely a huge relief. But I imagine it's still a long way from being completely out.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But getting it to stop spreading, that's a big turning point. It means firefighters can shift gears, go from just protecting structures to really attacking the fire itself.
Makes sense, so they can focus on putting it out completely and making sure it doesn't flare up again. Speaking of which, both CBS and SF Gate mentioned firefighters would be out there for days afterward, watching for hot spots and things like that.
Yeah, that's a really important part of the process, even if it's not as dramatic as the initial firefight. You see, even when the flames are gone, the danger's not necessarily over. You could have smoldering embers hidden in the dry brush. All it takes is a gust of wind and boom, you've got another fire on your hands.
So even with the good news, the Oakland Fire Department's work wasn't even close to being done.
Nope, not even close.
What else stood out to you in these articles about the lasting impacts of this fire?
Well, for one thing, CBS mentioned that westbound I-580 was shut down for a while because of the fire.
Wow, I-580.
Yeah, it was reopened later that evening. But still, that's a major freeway. It just goes to show you how these kinds of events can have ripple effects across the entire region.
It's easy to forget about those wider impacts when you're not directly in harm's way. But it's a good reminder that the effects of something like this can be felt far beyond the fire zone itself.
Exactly. You've got road closures, potential power outages, smoke affecting air quality for miles.
And that's not even considering the longer-term economic and environmental impacts.
Right, the cost of fighting the fire, the property damage, the loss of trees and vegetation.
It's a lot to process. So we've talked about the immediate response, the aftermath, but I'm curious, from your perspective, what are the big lessons we can learn from something like this, especially for those of us living in fire-prone areas? What should we be taking away from an experience like this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest takeaways here is the importance of being prepared.
Like having a plan and knowing your evacuation route.
Exactly, and knowing the potential hazards in your area.
Absolutely. And I know this might sound obvious, but seeing how fast this fire escalated, it's a reminder that every single minute counts. When they tell you to evacuate, you evacuate.
You got it, no hesitation.
Better safe than sorry.
100%. And beyond just being prepared as individuals, this fire also highlighted something else, the importance of communities working together.
How so?
Well, think about Berkeley, urging evacuations even before the fire got to them. That kind of communication and coordination between agencies is huge.
It's like it's not just about protecting individual homes anymore. It's about protecting entire communities.
Exactly, and that takes a collective effort.
No one can do it alone.
Exactly.
And that effort includes thinking long term, right?
Absolutely.
I remember SF Gate mentioning something called defensible space. What exactly is that?
So defensible space is about creating a buffer zone around your property to slow down the spread of wildfires.
Okay, what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Well, it could be clearing out flammable vegetation within a certain distance of your house, using fire-resistant landscaping materials, even choosing building materials that are less likely to burn.
So it's about being proactive, taking steps to reduce the risk before a fire even starts?
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. But beyond individual homeowners, are there bigger lessons we can learn from this? Like bigger than just individual and community preparedness?
You're hitting on something really important now. This Oakland Hills fire, it's a stark reminder that we're living in a different world now. A world where wildfires are becoming more frequent and more intense.
And not just in California, right?
Right. This isn't just a California problem anymore. It's a global issue.
So what do we do? How do we adapt to this new reality? It's kind of daunting when you put it like that. We have got to be ready, like, right now, but we also got to think long term. Like, the whole wildfire game is changing, right? It feels like we're playing catch up.
Yeah, it's a whole new ballgame. It's not enough to just fight fires the way we used to. We need a new approach, something that tackles everything. How we prevent fires, how we build communities that can bounce back, even how we live in these fire-prone places.
So it's about being proactive, getting ahead of the problem instead of just reacting to it after the fact. So less firefighting and more, what would you even call it?
Fire-smart planning.
Yeah, something like that. But how do we actually do that? What kind of strategies are we talking about?
Well, we already touched on one, building those defensible spaces around homes. Reducing that fuel for the fire, slowing it down. But it goes way beyond individual homes. We need those larger fuel reduction projects, too. Things like controlled burns, forest thinning, especially where those wildland areas meet our cities.
And that probably takes a lot of coordination, right? Not just within communities, but at the state and federal levels, too, I'd imagine.
Absolutely. We got to be on the same page if we want to manage wildfires effectively. And there's another tough conversation we need to have. Where and how we build. Expanding into these fire-prone areas without a plan? Well, it's just asking for trouble.
Yeah, it's like we can't bury our heads in the sand and pretend these risks don't exist.
Nope.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've gone way beyond just one fire in the Oakland Hills. We've talked about how these fires work, how important it is to be ready, and how we need to rethink our whole approach to wildfires, right? So as we're wrapping up, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to remember?
I want them to remember that we can do this, we can tackle this. Wildfires, they're not unbeatable. If we understand the risks, take steps to reduce them, and work together, we can build a safer future for ourselves and for everyone who comes after us.
That's a really good note to end on. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but you're right, we can make a difference. So thanks for walking us through all of this. I really appreciate your expertise.
Happy to be here.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Oakland Hills fire. Hopefully you're leaving today with a better understanding of not just this fire, but of the bigger picture when it comes to wildfires. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more we know, the better prepared we'll all be. So, until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.